In the far reaches of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a universal truth that every species learns eventually. Never underestimate a creature that evolved as both predator and prey. Humans, those strange bipedal mammals from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star, have become the stuff of legend among the galactic community. They are the only species known to punch their way out of certain death, to smile in the face of impossible odds, and to turn their greatest weaknesses into their most devastating strengths. This is the story of Marcus Chun, a maintenance engineer who was supposed to fix broken machinery, not broken civilizations. But when the most advanced military forces in the galaxy couldn't stop an unstoppable threat, they discovered that sometimes the best weapon isn't technology, strategy, or superior firepower. Sometimes it's just a human who refuses to quit, armed with nothing but his bare hands and an absolutely terrifying level of stubbornness. Commander Zuravalas of the Andromedan Defense Fleet was about to learn why humans have a saying, "It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." And as she watched this unremarkable human face down an enemy that had conquered star systems, she found herself whispering words she never thought she'd say about any alien species. "I wish he was mine." Marcus Chun had been fixing things his entire life. As a child on New Shanghai Colony, he'd repaired his family's atmospheric recycler with spare parts and determination. As a teenager, he'd rebuilt hover bikes from scraps that the wealthy colonists had thrown away. Now, at 32, he found himself elbow-deep in the guts of a quantum drive aboard the ANS Sovereign, the flagship of the Andromedan Defense Fleet, wondering how his simple life had become so complicated. The ship hummed around him, a massive vessel that housed over 50,000 crew members from a dozen different species. The Andromedans, with their tall, graceful forms and silvery skin, had built a fleet that was supposedly the finest in the galaxy. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed, their tactical knowledge refined through millennia of warfare, and their discipline legendary among spacefaring civilizations. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of engine grease across his dark skin. He was one of only a handful of humans aboard the Sovereign, part of a cultural exchange program that the Andromedan Council had reluctantly approved. Most of the crew treated him with polite indifference, occasionally asking him curious questions about human customs or marveling at his species' apparent ability to function on minimal sleep and maximum coffee consumption. "Chun, report to Bridge Command immediately," the ship's communication system announced in the melodious tones of an Andromedan translator. Marcus frowned, checking his chronometer. His shift wasn't supposed to end for another 3 hours, and he was in the middle of calibrating the secondary power coupling for the ship's defense grid. "On my way," he responded, grabbing his toolkit and making his way through the ship's corridors. The Sovereign was beautiful in an alien way, all flowing curves and crystalline surfaces that seemed to pulse with inner light. Everything was designed for beings that stood nearly 7 feet tall, which meant Marcus often felt like a child navigating a world built for giants. The bridge was a testament to Andromedan engineering, a vast circular chamber with multiple levels and holographic displays that showed real-time tactical information from across their sector of space. At the center of it all stood Commander Zuravalas, the most decorated officer in the Andromedan fleet and, according to the ship's gossip network, one of the most beautiful beings in known space. Marcus had to admit they were right about that. Commander Velas stood nearly 8 feet tall, with the characteristic silver-blue skin of her people and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of nebulae. Her uniform was pristine, her bearing regal, and when she spoke, other beings listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for religious experiences. "Maintenance Engineer Chun," she said, turning to face him as he approached. Her voice carried the formal distance that seemed to be standard among Andromedan officers. But Marcus caught something else in her tone. Uncertainty? Fear? That was unusual for someone with a reputation. "Yes, Commander. You called for me." Around them, the bridge crew continued their work, but Marcus noticed the tension in the air. Holographic displays showed star charts marked with pulsing red indicators, and several junior officers were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "We have a situation," Commander Velas said, gesturing to the main display. 3 days ago, the planet Kepler 442b went dark. Complete communications blackout. Yesterday, the same thing happened to the Rigel Station complex. This morning, we lost contact with the entire Proxima system. Marcus studied the star chart, noting the pattern. The affected systems formed a rough line, pointing directly toward the core worlds of Andromedan space. Something's moving through your territory. Something big enough to take out entire systems. Precisely, the commander said, and Marcus heard the first note of admiration creep into her voice. Among the dozens of senior officers who had been briefed on this situation, the human maintenance engineer was the first to immediately grasp the strategic implications. Our long-range sensors detected a massive object moving through space at approximately 70% of light speed. It appears to be artificial, roughly the size of a small moon. "A ship?" Marcus asked. "We believe so, though unlike anything in our databases. It's heading directly for Andromeda Prime, our home world. At current speed, it will arrive in 6 days." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Andromeda Prime was home to over 12 billion beings. "What do your military analysts think?" Commander Velas exchanged glances with her senior officers. "They think it's the Devourers." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but the reaction from the bridge crew was immediate and telling. Several officers unconsciously stepped back, and he heard someone whisper what sounded like a prayer in the Andromedan language. "I take it that's bad," Marcus said. "The Devourers are a legend among our people," the commander explained. "Stories tell of a race of beings that consumed entire civilizations, turning their technology and resources into an ever-growing fleet of planet killers. They supposedly disappeared from this galaxy over 1 million years ago, but the stories describe exactly what we're seeing now." Marcus nodded slowly, his engineer's mind already working through the problem. "What's the plan?" "We're assembling every available ship in the fleet. The full might of the Andromedan Defense Force will meet this threat at the Helios Nexus, a choke point system that will give us tactical advantage. Our most advanced weapons, our finest tactical minds, our most experienced warriors." Commander Velas paused, studying Marcus with those nebula deep eyes. "However, our analysis suggests we have less than a 30% chance of success. And you're telling me this because humans have a reputation," she said simply. "Throughout the galaxy, there are stories about your species. How you never surrender. How you find ways to win battles that should be impossible to win. How you turn disadvantages into strengths." She leaned forward slightly. "We need that kind of thinking now." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd heard. A massive alien threat was bearing down on the most advanced civilization he'd ever encountered, and they wanted advice from a guy who fixed broken machines for a living. "Commander, I'm just a maintenance engineer. I'm not a military strategist or a tactical genius. I fix things when they break." "Perhaps," Commander Velas said, "that's exactly what we need." The next 4 hours were unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. He found himself in briefing rooms with admirals and tactical experts, studying holographic displays of the approaching threat and listening to debates about fleet positioning, weapon effectiveness, and evacuation protocols. The Andromedans were meticulous in their planning, their strategies refined through centuries of military science. And Marcus could see exactly why they were going to lose. "You're fighting this thing like it's another fleet," he said during a pause in the planning session. "Like it's something you understand. But you said it yourself. This is completely unlike anything in your databases." Admiral Theron, an elderly Andromedan with scars that spoke of a lifetime of battles, turned to face the human. "What do you suggest, Engineer Chun?" "I suggest we stop thinking like military strategists and start thinking like engineers," Marcus replied. "You've got this massive object moving at 70% of light speed. That's not just fast, That's impossibly fast for something that size. The energy requirements alone should be beyond anything we can imagine. Continue, Commander Velas said, and Marcus noticed that she was listening to him with the same intensity she'd shown during the tactical briefings. Whatever's powering that thing, it has to have weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Nothing that big and that fast can be perfect. There have to be systems that can fail, critical points that can be disrupted. Marcus stood up, moving to the holographic display. Instead of trying to outfight it, we need to outthink it. And how? Admiral Theron asked with barely concealed skepticism. Does a maintenance engineer propose to outthink a million-year-old alien intelligence? Marcus grinned, and several of the Andromedan officers stepped back at the expression. There was something unsettling about a human smile, something that spoke of ancient hunting instincts and a refusal to accept defeat. Simple, Marcus said. We do what humans do best. We break things. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and planning. The Andromedan fleet, over 3,000 ships representing the finest military technology in known space, moved to intercept the alien vessel at the Helios Nexus. Marcus found himself assigned to the Sovereign's engineering team, officially tasked with maintaining ship systems during the upcoming battle. Unofficially, he was working on something else entirely. "Chen, what are you building?" asked Dr. Kess, the ship's chief engineer. She was an Andromedan who had shown more patience with human eccentricities than most of her colleagues, though she still seemed baffled by Marcus's approach to problem-solving. "Insurance," Marcus replied, welding together pieces of equipment that had no business being connected. "Your people are excellent at following protocols and procedures, but sometimes when everything goes wrong, you need something that's never been tried before. This appears to be a modified sensor array connected to the ship's emergency beacon system," Dr. Kess observed. "What possible purpose could this serve?" "Maybe nothing," Marcus admitted, "but maybe everything. The thing about being human is that we don't just fight to win. We fight to survive. And sometimes that makes all the difference." On the second day, as the fleet prepared to engage the alien vessel, Commander Velas visited the engineering section. She moved through the organized chaos of pre-battle preparations like a figure from legend, her presence somehow calming the nervous energy that had infected the crew. "Engineer Chun," she said, approaching his workstation. "Are you prepared for what's coming?" Marcus looked up from his modifications, studying her face. Beneath the command mask, he could see something that surprised him. She was afraid. Not of dying. Andromedans were famous for their courage in battle. She was afraid of failing her people. "Commander, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really bring me into this? I mean, the real reason. Not the stuff about human reputation or tactical thinking." Commander Velas was quiet for a long moment, her silver eyes studying the strange device he'd been building. "Because," she said finally, "in every story we have about humans, there's one common thread. You never give up. Even when you're outmatched, outnumbered, and facing impossible odds, you find a way to keep fighting. And right now, I need to believe that such determination exists." Marcus nodded, understanding. "Commander, I can't promise we'll win this fight, but I can promise you something else." "What's that?" "Whatever happens out there, whatever this thing throws at us, we're going to hit back. Hard. And we're going to keep hitting until either it's gone or we are." For the first time since he'd met her, Commander Velas smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but it transformed her entire face. "I wish," she said softly, almost to herself, "that such determination could be shared among all our people." The alien vessel appeared on their sensors 12 hours later, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The tactical displays didn't do it justice. This wasn't just a ship, it was a technological monstrosity that defied comprehension. Thousands of kilometers long, it moved through space like a living thing, its surface covered in structures that pulsed with malevolent energy. "All ships, prepare for engagement." Admiral Theron's voice echoed across the fleet communications. "Today we defend not just our worlds, but our right to exist in this galaxy." Marcus strapped himself into his emergency station and checked his improvised device one last time. Around him, the engineering crew moved with practiced efficiency, their training taking over despite the magnitude of what they faced. Incoming transmission from the alien vessel, reported the communications officer. Put it through, Commander Velas ordered. The voice that filled the bridge was like nothing Marcus had ever heard. It was ancient, cold, and utterly without compassion. We are the harvest. We consume. You will be consumed. Resistance is futile. Your technology will be absorbed. Your worlds will be harvested. Your species will become part of our growing. This is Commander Zura Velas of the Andromedan Defense Fleet, she replied, her voice steady despite the threat. You are not welcome in our space. Turn back now, or we will stop you. The laughter that responded was like the sound of dying stars. You cannot stop the harvest. You are merely another meal in the endless feast. The alien vessel opened fire, and Marcus learned what true terror looked like. The first salvo from the harvester ship turned 3 Andromedan dreadnoughts into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The weapons weren't like anything in the galactic databases. Beams of pure entropy that seemed to unravel matter at the molecular level, reducing the most advanced military vessels in known space to constituent atoms in seconds. Marcus watched the tactical display in horror as the cream of the Andromedan fleet opened fire in response. Quantum torpedoes, plasma cannons, antimatter missiles, weapons that could crack planets, struck the alien vessel's hull and simply disappeared, absorbed by some kind of adaptive shielding that turned their own attacks against them. Impossible, breathed Dr. Kess, staring at the sensor readings. It's converting our weapons' fire into raw energy and feeding it back into its own power systems. Not impossible, Marcus said grimly, his engineer's mind racing through the implications. Just really, really advanced. But that also means... His words were cut off as the Sovereign shuddered under enemy fire. The bridge lights flickered, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity fluctuating as the ship's power grid struggled to compensate for damage. Hull breach on decks 12 through 15, reported the damage control officer. We've lost primary shield generators and 2 of the main engines. Commander Velas stood at the center of the chaos, her calm presence the only stable point in a rapidly deteriorating situation. All ships implement attack pattern Delta 7. Focus fire on the enemy vessel's propulsion systems. Commander, Admiral Theron's voice crackled over the communications system. We're losing ships faster than we can coordinate attacks. Whatever this thing is, our weapons are completely ineffective. Marcus watched the battle unfold with growing understanding. The Andromedans were magnificent fighters, disciplined, brave, and tactically superior to most species in the galaxy. But they were fighting a conventional battle against an unconventional enemy, and it was going exactly as badly as he'd expected. Dr. Kess, he said, unbuckling his safety harness, I need to get to the primary sensor array. Are you insane? We're in the middle of a battle. Exactly. Which means everyone's too busy to stop me from doing something stupid. Marcus grabbed his improvised device and headed for the door, but Commander Velas's voice stopped him. Engineer Chun, where are you going? To fix the problem, he replied simply. The problem is a moon-sized alien battleship that's systematically destroying our fleet. No, Marcus said, turning back to face her. The problem is that we're fighting their fight instead of our fight. Without waiting for a response, he left the bridge and made his way through the ship's corridors toward the sensor array. The Sovereign continued to shake under enemy fire, and emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. Crew members rushed past him, carrying wounded colleagues and emergency equipment, their faces set with grim determination. The primary sensor array was located in one of the ship's most vulnerable sections, a crystalline structure that extended from the main hull like a delicate flower. It was also one of the most heavily shielded areas of the ship, designed to keep functioning even under intense enemy fire. Marcus connected his device to the sensor array's main processing unit and began uploading the program he'd spent the last 2 days writing. It was crude by Andromedan standards, more brute force than elegant solution, but it would serve his purpose. "Chen, what are you doing?" Dr. Kess's voice came through his communicator. "Something your people would never think of," Marcus replied, watching the upload progress. "I'm cheating." The device finished its upload just as the Sovereign took another hit, this one close enough to crack the sensor array's protective housing. Marcus could see space through the fractures, and in that space, the alien vessel hung like a mechanical planet, its surface crawling with energy that made his eyes water to look at directly. "All ships," he heard Admiral Theron's voice over the emergency channels, "withdraw to minimum safe distance. We cannot win this engagement." "Negative," Commander Velas's voice cut through the static. "We cannot allow this thing to reach Andromeda Prime. Commander, we've lost over 40% of our fleet in less than an hour. Our weapons are useless against their defenses. This is not bravery. This is suicide." Marcus activated his device and felt the ship's sensor array surge to full power. Instead of passive scanning, he was turning it into an active transmission system, broadcasting a signal that would either save them all or get him court-martialed, assuming anyone survived to hold the trial. "Dr. Kess," he said into his communicator, "tell the commander I need her to trust me for about 60 seconds. "Marcus, what are you?" The alien vessel's response was immediate and violent. Every weapon system on a massive ship turned toward the Sovereign, energy beams that could vaporize battleships, focusing on their position with deadly intent. Evasive maneuvers. Commander Velas's voice echoed through the ship as the pilot threw them into a series of turns that pushed the artificial gravity to its limits. Marcus held onto the sensor array support structure as the ship bucked and rolled around him. His device continued to transmit, sending out a signal that he hoped would do exactly what his calculations suggested it would do. The first thing he noticed was that the alien ship's adaptive shielding flickered. Just for a moment, but it was enough to prove his theory. "Commander," he said into his communicator, "I need every ship in the fleet to target the following coordinates with everything they have. Right now." "Engineer Chun, this is hardly the time. Trust me," Marcus interrupted. "Please." There was a pause that lasted forever, and then Commander Velas's voice came over the fleet communications. "All ships, target the coordinates being transmitted by the Sovereign. Full weapons, all batteries, fire on my mark." Marcus watched his sensor readings, waiting for the exact moment when his signal would create the feedback loop he'd been calculating. The alien ship's systems were incredibly advanced, but they followed the same basic principles as any technology. They had inputs, processing systems, and outputs, and, like any system, they could be overloaded if you knew where to push. Now he whispered. "Fire," Commander Velas ordered. The combined firepower of nearly 2,000 ships struck the alien vessel at the exact moment that Marcus's signal caused its adaptive shielding to enter a recursive loop, trying to adapt to a constantly changing input that referenced itself. For 3.7 seconds, the most advanced defensive system in the galaxy was completely offline. The damage was immediate and catastrophic. Quantum torpedoes designed to crack planets punched through the alien hull like it was paper. Plasma cannons meant to glass continents carved deep channels into its superstructure. Antimatter missiles that could sterilize solar systems detonated in chain reactions that lit up local space like a second star. When the light faded, the alien vessel was still there. Damaged, bleeding atmosphere and exotic matter from 1,000 wounds, but still functional, still dangerous, and now was very, very angry. "Impressive." The cold voice came over their communications again. "One among you shows intelligence. You will be preserved for study before consumption." Marcus felt the ship lurch as some kind of tractor beam locked onto the Sovereign, drawing them inexorably toward the alien vessel. Around them, the remaining Andromedan ships continued to fight, but it was clear that his trick would only work once. The alien defenses were already adapting, becoming stronger than before. "Commander," Marcus said, making his way back to the bridge, "I need to get aboard that ship." Absolutely not, came the immediate reply. It's the only way. I damaged their systems, but I didn't stop them. And now they're going to dissect our ship piece by piece until they figure out what I did. The bridge was in chaos when Marcus arrived. Half the control stations were offline, emergency crews were working to repair critical systems, and the main view screen showed the alien vessel growing larger as they were pulled toward it. Engineer Chun, Commander Vela said without turning away from the tactical display, explain to me how boarding an enemy vessel that just survived our entire fleet's combined firepower could possibly help our situation. Because the thing about humans, Marcus said, checking the charge on his handheld plasma cutter, is that we're really, really good at breaking things from the inside. Dr. Kess looked up from her damage assessment. Marcus, that's not a plan. That's barely even a concept. It's what we've got, Marcus replied. Commander, that ship is going to reach Andromeda Prime in 5 days. Your fleet can't stop it. But maybe, just maybe, one guy with a toolbox and a complete disregard for personal safety can find a way to shut it down permanently. Even if you could somehow board that vessel, Commander Velas said, how would you navigate its systems? How would you communicate with its technology? Marcus grinned, and once again, the Andromedan officers seemed unsettled by the expression. The same way I've been fixing broken things my whole life. I'll figure out as I go. The alien ship's tractor beam was drawing them toward what appeared to be a docking bay, a massive opening in the vessel's hull that could have swallowed a dozen ships the size of the Sovereign. As they got closer, Marcus could see details of the alien technology that made his engineer's heart race with excitement and terror in equal measure. Commander, he said quietly, there's something you should know. What's that? While I was building my feedback device, I discovered something about their communication systems. They're not just machine intelligences. They're organic components integrated into their technology. Living beings that have been modified. Commander Velas turned to look at him, her silver eyes wide with understanding. The species they've consumed, they're still alive in there. Some of them, anyway. Which means this isn't just about stopping one ship. It's about freeing potentially millions of enslaved minds. The Sovereign settled into the alien docking bay with a gentleness that was somehow more terrifying than violence would have been. Through the view screen, Marcus could see the bay sealing itself, atmosphere rushing in to create a breathable environment. They want us alive, Commander Velas observed. For now. Then, we'd better not waste the opportunity, Marcus said, shouldering his pack of improvised tools and weapons. Dr. Kess, can you give me a portable sensor unit? Something that can interface with their technology? Marcus, Dr. Kess said softly, what you're proposing is suicide. That ship has been traveling the galaxy for who knows how long, consuming civilizations that were far more advanced than humans. What makes you think you can succeed where they failed? Marcus paused at the bridge's entrance, considering the question. Around him, the crew of the Sovereign prepared for what would likely be their final battle, checking weapons and saying goodbye to colleagues they'd served with for decades. Because, he said finally, those civilizations try to fight with honor. They try to fight with rules and tactics and strategies. But humans don't fight with honor when survival is on the line. We fight dirty. We cheat. We break things that aren't supposed to be broken, and we keep fighting long after any sane species would give up. And you think that's enough? Marcus looked back at Commander Velas, taking in her regal bearing, her unwavering courage in the face of impossible odds, and the way she'd trusted a human maintenance engineer with the fate of her entire civilization. I think it's all we've got, he said. But sometimes that's enough. The airlock cycled, and Marcus stepped into an alien ship that had conquered star systems, carrying nothing but his tools, his determination, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of human stubbornness. Behind him, Commander Velas watched him go and whispered something in the Andromedan language that roughly translated to "May the stars guide your path." But what she was really thinking, as she watched this unremarkable human disappear into the belly of the beast, was something she couldn't quite bring herself to say aloud. She was thinking that maybe, just maybe, humans were the most terrifying species in the galaxy. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that thought made her smile. The interior of the alien vessel was a nightmare made manifest in metal and flesh. Marcus stepped through corridors that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, past walls that seemed to breathe, and surfaces that felt warm to the touch. The air tasted of copper and ozone, with an underlying sweetness that made his stomach turn. His portable sensor unit chirped constantly as it tried to make sense of the technology around him. The readings were impossible. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist, materials that registered as both organic and mechanical, and power sources that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Fascinating, a voice said behind him, and Marcus spun around to find himself face to face with something that had once been humanoid. The being stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body a disturbing fusion of flesh and technology. Cables ran through its skin like veins, and one eye had been replaced with a multifaceted optical sensor that glowed with soft blue light. "You're not one of theirs," Marcus said, recognizing the basic body structure beneath the modifications. "I was Andromedan once," the being replied, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested technological augmentation. "Commander Thane Carell of the battle cruiser Starfire. That was 700 years ago. Time becomes meaningless here." Marcus kept his hand near his plasma cutter, but something in the being's posture suggested it wasn't immediately hostile. "You're part of the ship now. We all are. Every species the Harvest has consumed becomes part of the collective. Our knowledge, our technology, our biological distinctiveness, all of it absorbed and integrated into something greater." The being that had once been Commander Carell tilted its head, studying Marcus with disturbing intensity. "But you're different. I'm human. Yes, the Harvest has encountered your species before, but never successfully consumed one. There's something about human psychology that resists integration. Your minds are too chaotic, too unpredictable." Marcus filed that information away and continued moving through the corridor, following his sensor readings toward what appeared to be a major power distribution center. The modified Andromedan followed him, its footsteps eerily silent on the organic flooring. "Where are you going, human?" "To break things," Marcus replied simply. "You cannot damage the Harvest. We have consumed civilizations that span galaxies. We have absorbed the knowledge of species that existed before your son was born. What could one primitive being possibly accomplish?" Marcus stopped and turned to face the creature. "Tell me something, Commander Carell. When the Harvest took your ship, how many of your crew fought back?" "All of them. We fought with honor, as befits the Andromedan defense fleet. And how many of them try to break your own ship's systems to deny them to the enemy?" The creature was quiet for a long moment. "That would have been unthinkable. The Starfire was a work of art, the pinnacle of our technological achievement. To deliberately damage it would have been sacrilege. Right?" Marcus said, resuming his walk. "That's the difference between your people and mine. When humans are backed into a corner, we don't worry about sacrilege. They passed through chambers that defied description, spaces where the ship's organic and mechanical components merged in ways that hurt to look at directly. Marcus saw other beings, creatures that had once been members of a dozen different species, all now integrated into the ship's collective consciousness. Some watched him with curious eyes, others ignored him completely, but all of them moved with the synchronized purpose of components in a vast machine. "The central processing core is ahead," the modified Andromedan said. "That's where you'll find the Harvest's primary consciousness. But it's guarded by security systems that have never been breached." "Good thing I don't plan to sneak in," Marcus replied, pulling his plasma cutter from his tool belt. "You're going to fight your way through?" "No," Marcus said, studying the energy conduits that ran along the ceiling. "I'm going to do what any good maintenance engineer does when faced with a system that's too complex to understand." He aimed his plasma cutter at a major junction box and fired. The beam cut through advanced alien materials like they were paper, and immediately warning lights began flashing throughout the corridor. Alarms wailed in frequencies that made Marcus's teeth ache, and He could feel the ship's automated systems responding to the damage. "You're attacking the power grid," the creature observed with what might have been admiration. "Crude, but effective." "The thing about complex systems," Marcus said, moving to the next junction box, "is that they're only as strong as their weakest link. And every system, no matter how advanced, needs power." He continued his work, cutting through conduits and junction boxes with methodical precision. His sensor unit helped him identify critical pathways, and his experience with maintaining systems gave him an intuitive understanding of how to cause maximum disruption with minimal effort. The ship's response was swift and violent. Security drones emerged from hidden alcoves, sleek mechanical creatures that moved with predatory grace. They opened fire with weapons that seemed to bend space itself, creating gravitational distortions that could crush a man to paste. Marcus dove behind a support pillar as reality warped around him, the drone's weapons tearing chunks out of the ship's own structure in their eagerness to destroy the intruder. "Fascinating," the modified Andromedan said, watching the battle unfold with detached interest. "The security protocols are treating the power grid damage as a higher priority than preserving ship integrity. That tells us something important," Marcus shouted over the sound of exotic weapons fire. "This thing isn't as invulnerable as it pretends to be." He emerged from cover long enough to fire his plasma cutter at another conduit, this one apparently connected to the drone's power supply. Half of them simply stopped moving, their gravitational weapons powering down as their energy sources were cut. The remaining drones adapted quickly, shifting to projectile weapons that didn't require as much power. But Marcus was already moving, using his knowledge of maintenance access ways to disappear into the ship's service corridors. "Clever," the modified being said, somehow keeping pace despite the narrow confines of the maintenance tunnels. "You're using the ship's own infrastructure against it." "Basic human strategy," Marcus replied, consulting his sensor readings. "When you can't win a fair fight, change the rules." They emerged into a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The space was cathedral-like in its dimensions, filled with towering columns of organic machinery that pulsed with bioluminescent light. At the center of it all was something that might have been a brain, if brains could be the size of buildings and shot through with fiber optic cables. "The central processing core," the modified Andromedan said unnecessarily. Marcus stared at the massive organic computer, his engineer's mind struggling to comprehend the complexity of what he was seeing. This wasn't just a machine, it was a living ecosystem, a fusion of biological and technological components that had evolved over millions of years. "How many minds are in there?" he asked quietly. "Billions. Every consciousness the harvest has ever absorbed, all integrated into a collective intelligence that spans the galaxy. They're all still alive, in a sense, but they're part of something larger now." Marcus thought of Commander Velas, still fighting a hopeless battle against impossible odds. He thought of the billions of beings on Andromeda Prime who had no idea that death was racing toward them at 70% of light speed. And he thought of all the civilizations that had stood exactly where he stood now, faced with the same impossible choice. "There has to be a way to free them," he said. "Perhaps. But it would require destroying the very thing that keeps them alive. The processing core doesn't just control the ship, it maintains the consciousness patterns of every absorbed being. Damage it significantly, and billions of minds die forever." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pulsing brain that was both prison and life support for countless civilizations. It was an impossible choice: save the living at the cost of the dead, or preserve the dead and doom the living. Then he smiled, and the modified Andromedan took an involuntary step backward. "What are you thinking?" it asked. "I'm thinking," Marcus said, pulling out his improvised sensor modification device, "that whoever built this thing never dealt with a human engineer before." He began connecting his equipment to the processing core's external interface systems, working with the focused intensity that had made him legendary among his colleagues. The ship's security systems responded immediately, but Marcus had learned their patterns during his journey through the vessel. He knew how to stay one step ahead of their automated responses. "What are you doing?" the modified being asked, its mechanical components analyzing Marcus's work with growing alarm. "Something that should be impossible," Marcus replied, uploading his modified feedback program into the ship's central systems. "I'm not going to destroy the processing core. I'm going to reprogram it." "That's impossible. The collective consciousness has safeguards against external modification. Even if you could bypass the security protocols, the computational requirements would be beyond anything a single individual could accomplish." Marcus grinned as his program began to integrate with the ship's systems. "That's the beautiful thing about humans. We're too stupid to know when something's impossible." The processing core began to pulse with new patterns of light as Marcus's program spread through its neural networks. Instead of trying to overwrite the existing consciousness patterns, his modification was creating spaces between them, gaps in the collective where individual minds could exist without being absorbed. "You're not freeing them," the modified Andromedan said with growing understanding. "You're teaching them how to free themselves. Every consciousness in there was once an individual," Marcus explained, his fingers flying over the interface as he guided his program through the ship's vast neural networks. "They still remember what it was like to make their own choices. I'm just giving them the tools to do it again." The ship's response was immediate and catastrophic. Alarms blared throughout the massive vessel as the collective consciousness detected the intrusion. Security systems that had remained dormant for centuries activated, and Marcus found himself facing defenses that had been designed to stop entire fleets. But he was no longer working alone. Deep within the processing core, individual minds were beginning to assert themselves. Andromedan tactical experts started disrupting the ship's weapon systems. Zephyrian engineers began redirecting power flows away from critical systems. Voltarian scientists started questioning the collective's fundamental assumptions about reality. "It's working," the modified being said with something approaching wonder. "They're remembering who they used to be." The battle for control of the ship played out on levels that Marcus couldn't directly observe. In the digital realm of the processing core, billions of individual consciousnesses were fighting for the right to exist as themselves rather than as part of a collective whole. It was a war between individual identity and enforced unity between the chaos of independent thought and the order of shared consciousness. And slowly, gradually, the individuals began to win. "Human," a new voice spoke from the ship's communication systems, and Marcus recognized the harmonic patterns of an artificial intelligence that was no longer entirely artificial. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Don't thank me yet," Marcus said, monitoring his sensors as the ship's power systems fluctuated wildly. "We still need to stop this thing from reaching Andromeda Prime." "That will not be a problem," the voice replied. "We have access to all of the Harvest's accumulated knowledge, including the location of every other vessel in their fleet. The war is far from over, but today it ends differently than it has for the last million years." Marcus felt the ship shudder as its massive engines powered down for the first time in eons. Through the ship's internal communication system, he could hear voices, thousands of them, speaking in languages from across the galaxy, all expressing the same sentiment in different words. They were free. "Commander Velas," he said into his communicator, hoping the signal would reach the Sovereign. "This is Marcus Chun. Mission accomplished. The ship is no longer hostile." "Marcus!" Commander Velas's voice crackled through the static, disbelief and relief warring in her tone. "What did you do?" "What humans do best," Marcus replied, leaning against the processing core that now pulsed with the chaotic, beautiful rhythm of billions of individual minds. "I broke the rules." 3 weeks after the Battle of Helios Nexus, Marcus Chun stood in the observation deck of the ANS Sovereign, watching the most impossible sight in galactic history. Outside the viewport, the massive Harvest vessel hung in space like a metallic moon, but it was no longer the predatory nightmare that had threatened to consume Andromeda Prime. Its hull had been transformed, organic and mechanical components working together to create something entirely new, a massive mobile habitat where billions of freed consciousnesses were learning how to be individuals again. The medical teams estimate it will take several years to safely separate all the biological components, Commander Velas said, joining him at the viewport. She had changed since the battle, her formal military bearings softened by something that Marcus was still learning to recognize as affection. Some of the integration has been so complete that attempting removal would be fatal. But they're free to choose, Marcus observed. That's what matters. The Federation Council has been in session for 4 days straight trying to figure out how to handle this situation, she continued. We have representatives of nearly 1,000 species who were presumed extinct, along with technological knowledge that spans millions of years. The political implications alone are staggering. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. Through the viewport, he could see small ships moving between the harvest vessel and the assembled Andromedan fleet. Shuttles carrying medical supplies, communication equipment, and, most importantly, family members who were being reunited with loved ones they thought they'd lost forever. Dr. Kess said you've been offered a position with the Andromedan Science Council, Commander Velas said. Senior Director of Impossible Engineering, I believe the title was. Yeah, well, turns out breaking things that shouldn't be broken is a more valuable skill than I thought, Marcus replied with a grin. But I haven't decided yet. What's holding you back? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in emotions he wasn't entirely ready to examine. The official story was that a human maintenance engineer had figured out how to disrupt the harvest ship systems and liberate its collective consciousness. It was a story that would become legend among the spacefaring civilizations. Another entry in the growing catalog of impossible things that humans had somehow managed to accomplish. But Marcus knew the real truth was simpler and more complex at the same time. He hadn't won through superior technology or brilliant strategy. He'd won because he was too stubborn to accept defeat and too human to leave billions of enslaved minds in captivity. I keep thinking about something Commander Carell told me. He said finally. He said humans were too chaotic to be absorbed by the collective. Too unpredictable. And that troubles you? No, that's what saved everyone. But it makes me wonder, what happens when the galaxy gets used to having humans around? When our unpredictability becomes predictable? Commander Velas studied his reflection in the viewport, her silver eyes thoughtful. Perhaps that's why the universe keeps presenting us with new challenges. To ensure that chaos and unpredictability remain forces for good rather than stagnation. Speaking of challenges, Marcus said, what's the latest intelligence on the other harvest vessels? 47 confirmed ships scattered across 3 galactic arms. The liberated consciousnesses from this vessel have provided us with their locations and tactical information, but engaging them will require a coordinated effort between multiple galactic governments. Commander Velas paused. The Federation is forming a joint task force. They've requested that humans take a leadership role. All of humanity, or just me, they're hoping for both. Your success here has convinced them that human tactical thinking might be the key to defeating the remaining harvest ships without massive casualties. Marcus laughed, a sound that still made Andromedan officers slightly nervous. They want us to do it again. Find 47 different impossible ways to break 47 different unbreakable ships. Can you? Probably. But not alone. Marcus turned away from the viewport to face her directly. The thing about humans is that we work best when we're part of a team. Individual creativity combined with collective effort. That's what really defeated the harvest. Not just my engineering, but your tactical coordination, Dr. Kess's technical support, and the courage of every single crew member who trusted a crazy plan from a maintenance engineer. Is that a yes to the Science Council position? It's a yes to whatever comes next, Marcus said. As long as I don't have to do it alone. Commander Velas smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face from regal authority to something warmer and infinitely more appealing. I don't think being alone will be a problem for you. Marcus Chen. The observation deck's communications system chimed, interrupting their conversation. Commander Velas, we're receiving a transmission from the Harvest vessel. The Collective Leadership Council requests permission to address the assembled fleet. Put it through, Commander Velas ordered. The voice that filled the observation deck was unlike anything Marcus had heard before. It carried the harmonic complexity of the old collective consciousness, but underneath that artificial precision was something unmistakably organic. The chaotic, beautiful discord of billions of individual voices learning to speak as one by choice rather than compulsion. People of the galaxy, the voice began, we are the liberated, those who were once consumed but have now chosen to remain together not as slaves but as family. We speak to you today to offer both warning and hope. Marcus watched through the viewport as the massive vessel's external displays activated, showing tactical information about the remaining Harvest ships scattered across the galaxy. The detail was staggering. Not just locations and capabilities, but psychological profiles of each ship's collective consciousness and strategic recommendations for liberation rather than destruction. The Harvest continues to threaten all life in this galaxy, the voice continued. But we have learned that even the most complete assimilation cannot destroy the fundamental desire for individual freedom. In every collective, there are minds waiting to be awakened. In every ship, there are consciousnesses ready to remember who they used to be. They're not just offering intelligence, Commander Velas observed. They're volunteering to help liberate the other ships. The human Marcus Chun showed us that the impossible becomes possible when approached with sufficient determination and complete disregard for conventional limitations, the voice from the ship said, and Marcus felt his cheeks flush at the galactic praise. We offer our knowledge, our capabilities, and our commitment to ensuring that no other civilization suffers the fate we endured for so long. This is Admiral Theron of the Andromedan Defense Fleet, came the response from the fleet's flagship. We accept your offer of alliance and look forward to working together to free your fellow vessels. There's more, the voice from the liberated continued. In our collective memory, we carry the history of every civilization the Harvest has encountered. We have maintained the cultural knowledge, the artistic traditions, and the scientific achievements of 1,000 species. With your help, we can begin the process of cultural restoration, bringing back languages, customs, and ways of life that were thought lost forever. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the implications hit him. This wasn't just about stopping a military threat. It was about resurrecting entire civilizations from the digital grave of the Harvest's collective memory. The universe is about to get a lot more crowded, he observed, and a lot more interesting, Commander Velas agreed. Marcus, what you've accomplished here goes beyond anything the galaxy has seen in recorded history. You've not just prevented a catastrophe, you've restored an entire segment of galactic civilization. We've restored it, Marcus corrected, and we're not done yet. The communication from the liberated continued with specific offers of assistance. Technological knowledge that could advance galactic civilization by centuries, tactical information about Harvest weaknesses that had never been successfully exploited, and, most importantly, volunteers to help with the liberation of the remaining vessels. The human concept of paying it forward has great appeal to us, the voice explained. We were saved by the actions of someone who owed us nothing and expected nothing in return. We choose to extend that same gift to others who remain in bondage. Marcus watched the activity around the massive vessel and felt something he'd never experienced before, the weight of galactic expectations. Across known space, civilizations were looking to humanity for leadership in what was shaping up to be the most significant military and humanitarian operation in galactic history. Commander, he said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. What's that? I'm terrified. All those worlds counting on us, all those minds still trapped in the other ships, all the responsibility for getting this right. It's overwhelming. Commander Velas studied his profile as he stared out at the stars. And yet you're still planning to see it through. Of course, being terrified and being determined aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, I think being a little scared helps. It keeps you focused on what's really at stake, which is... Marcus turned to meet her eyes, and, in that moment, Commander Vela saw something that made her understand why humans have become legend among the stars. It wasn't their technology or their tactical brilliance or their physical capabilities. It was their absolute, unwavering refusal to let fear stop them from doing what needed to be done. Everything, Marcus said simply. The freedom to choose, the right to exist as individuals, the chance for every consciousness in the galaxy to decide its own fate. That's what's at stake. And you think humans can preserve that? I think humans can help preserve that. But only if we work together with people like you. People who understand that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are impossible. Commander Vela smiled again, and this time Marcus caught the full force of it. In that expression, he saw not just personal affection, but something deeper, respect, admiration, and perhaps the beginning of something that transcended the boundaries between species. Marcus Chun, she said formally, on behalf of the Andromedan Defense Fleet and the Galactic Federation, I officially request that you accept the position of Senior Director of Impossible Engineering. And unofficially? Marcus asked. Unofficially, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear, I wish you were mine. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. In all the chaos of the last few weeks, he'd been so focused on the crisis at hand that he'd missed what was developing between them. But now, standing in the observation deck of a ship that had survived the impossible, looking out at stars that would continue to shine because of choices they'd made together, he finally understood what she was really saying. Commander, he said, matching her formal tone, I accept the position. And unofficially, Marcus grinned, that expression that had become a symbol of hope across the galaxy. Unofficially, I think I already am yours. And definitely mine. As if responding to some cosmic sense of timing, the Liberated chose that moment to begin its transformation sequence. The massive vessel's hull began to shift and reconfigure organic and mechanical components flowing together to create something entirely new. Not a weapon of consumption, but a vessel of exploration and restoration. Through the ship's communication systems, voices began to sing. 1,000 different species joining together in a harmony that celebrated not unity through assimilation, but diversity through choice. It was the sound of freedom echoing across the stars and carrying a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy. The harvest was broken. The impossible had become possible. And somewhere in that growing song of liberation, Marcus Chun and Commander Zervala stood together, watching the birth of a new age where being human meant something more than just being stubborn enough to break unbreakable things. It meant being brave enough to fix what had been broken for far too long. As the observation deck filled with the sound of galactic celebration, Marcus realized that his days as a simple maintenance engineer were definitely over. But his career in fixing impossible things was just getting started. And for the first time in his life, the future looked like something worth building toward.